Hello.
Hi
Thank you
there.
for joining us today. There may be a few other students that kind of drop in along the way. I'm just getting my screen up here. Here we go. Well, this might be really beneficial for you too, because we can really ask some specific questions on what you're looking for. We can use the chat just so that everybody knows that we're wanting to record this. Oh, here comes some other people. We are wanting to record this so that other students that have classes at this time have the opportunity to see the content. So if you don't want your voice on the video or something, you can use the chat box, but I'm happy to just have you guys unmute yourself and any questions that comes along the way, because I'm anticipating that there'll be some questions about this, in the sense that everybody has a different creative style and what does that look like and how do we use that. So before we start, I'd like to know generally, like I said, you could use the chat box. I'm curious what your majors are, or what industries you're wanting to go into, or what you might be using your resume for, and just kind of start there, and then I'll get going on the content. So you can use the chat box, or feel free to unmute yourself.
I can go ahead and say something. I'm a double major in history and humanities, and I would probably be using it to apply to grad school.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
And then I have a civil engineering German major, a double major. All right. And what type of grad school, Nick? Or do you have an idea of the type of program you want to go to?
Yeah, it would either be in classics or ancient history specifically.
Okay, perfect. And then James, if you get an opportunity, put in the chat, just let us know your major and maybe what you're using your resume for.
Oh,
Yeah, go ahead.
try and get my major in literature. And I guess right now my goal, like post-graduation in another year or so, is to get into copywriting.
Okay, awesome. Okay, great. And Brianna, what would you be using your resume for? Either in the chat or unmute yourself.
At the moment, I'm using it to get internships.
Internships.
I'll probably use it to get jobs or apply to grad school.
Okay, awesome. All right, that just gives me an idea of maybe the industries that you might be going into, or how you're using your resume, so I can help guide you with the content that I'll be providing. So
That too. I'm also like trying to look for internships as well.
okay, great. Well,
Whatever.
this is perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So to build a resume, whether and then also bring some design into it, it's really important that we understand the foundations of the resume. And so I want to go over what those foundations are, so that when you start incorporating, or if you start incorporating a little bit more creativity with your resume, you still have the understanding that you have to keep those foundations in mind. The resume is very much for the reader. It's very selfishly for the person that's reading your resume. So no matter how much you absolutely love your resume, we have to make sure that it's readable for that person, and for them to call you in for an interview. So the first thing that I want to show you is our career handbook. So if you go to our website, I'm just going to pull it up here. We are CSUChico .edu/careers. And on our Career Center website, I'll put it here in the chat so you guys have it if you want to bring it up. There you go. On our main page, we have a tile here, which is the career handbook. So this is what's going to open up a PDF. So I'm going to refer back to this in a couple slides, but this is going to be a great tool and resource for you to refer back to also, even after this is complete. Okay. First, I want to talk about just general font. It's so simple, but the way that you use your font can really help the reader skim over your resume to see what you're bringing to the table. So this is an example of just the content. It is very important that whether you're talking about an experience or a project, and we'll talk about other categories that we can have on our resume, you want to have the title, you'll want to have the company or the organization or the department that it's associated with, the location and the dates. These are the 4 things that you need to include in this first part. Underneath, we use these this bullet format to emphasize our skill statements. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what a skill statement is and how you build those up. Those are very important on your resume. And so we'll go over those. So when you're looking at your resume, so here's an example. We have resume samples in this career handbook. So I'm just going to show you one here, this one. So when you see here, here's the experience, right? We've got the title, who it was with, or this is the who it was with here, the location, and we have the dates, right? And they can look in different formats. What I want to show you is how we can change just the regular font and to make it more readable. So by using these normal, bold, underline, italics, all caps, we can use parentheses, we can even use color to showcase the content. So on my resume, if each of my experiences start with a bold title, everywhere that's bold on your resume, I know that that's the title that you held at that in that position or that experience or that project, right? The name, but the title of your project. And then the company, I would know it's a normal font, and the location is going to be in italics. And we can also justify our dates because it finds a little bit more balance in your page, but it naturally separates that content, even though it might be the same font style as, for example, in this case, the company. Here's another example. You can also separate, some people use these straight lines, or you could use a comma, or some people will use a bullet point in between the content, but we still want to use underline or parentheses. Again, I'm really partial to having those dates justified because it's just really nice balance on your page. If you're going to use color, I would avoid, I call it the markup red, right? When you turn in a paper and professor's got that nice red ink that marks up the things that need to be changed. So that's what we associate it with. So feel free to use color, but avoid that bright red. Sometimes we use that maroon red, like our Chico State red. We've got this nice maroon type color, and that would be fine. But you can also use things like a color bar, right? And so this is another way where, and typically I feel like I see most of this on a category, like your experience or your education, and not so much on the titles, but this is another way that we can separate our content. Okay. So now we're going to go to the handbook because we want to talk about those skill statements or those bullet points, right, that we see. These are the most important part, and it's content that regardless of how you design your resume needs to be on there. This not only helps with the employer to really know what skills you're coming with, but if you're applying to larger companies, it goes through one of those machines, right, and pulls out all those keywords to see if you're going to be a good fit for the job. This is where those keywords can be put in. So we're going to go to the career handbook and we're going to talk about this. Let me go back over. Okay. In this career handbook on, I don't know if you guys have it open, but it's on page 5 of this PDF, but it's the physical page 3 of this book. It's on the second half of this page, and we call these skill statements. Now, there are 3 parts. We have what we like to begin the bullet point with is a power verb. Now, we give you a whole page of power verbs here on page 4. Okay, we don't want you to go in and try to figure it out, especially, I mean, maybe for James, right? Literature, maybe this is not a problem for you. It definitely would be something that would be difficult for me. So I love using this to brainstorm different power verbs to start with, and so that we're not repeating ourselves, right? That we're not saying managed, 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 or designed, designed, right? We want to switch it up a little bit. We start with these power verbs because as the reader, as I'm skipping down those bullet points, I'm seeing collaborated, created, analyzed, designed. I'm already getting an idea of what you're going to tell me without reading the rest of it, right? So if you use collaborated, I know that you're collaborating with someone doing something, right? So you're hooking the reader into those skill statements. What we tend to do when we're doing our resumes, we write what we were responsible for, right? The tasks that we had to do. And that's a great start. You could definitely start there. But we all too often miss out, what skill did we use to be successful in delivering that task? And this is where it takes a little bit of a time to build up those skill statements, but it's going to be so beneficial for you to take that time to do so. Now we give you some additional resources up here. This content, I know it looks a little busy right here, but this content is from a survey from employers who are telling us what they want to see on a resume and what the top competencies that they're seeking in a candidate. This one down here, I'm going to zoom in so you guys can see. These are the top 8 competencies: critical thinking, problem solving, teamwork, collaboration, work ethic, oral and written communication, leadership, like digital technology, career management is how well do you know yourself? So that comes a lot more through your interview or your cover letter, that content. And then global multicultural fluency or intercultural fluency of how do you have experiences where you've needed to work with different perspectives, whether it's culture, whether it's religion, whether it's gender, race, age, right? There's so many different varieties of different perspectives. And so anywhere where you can show that you've worked with different groups of people is really desirable, because in a work environment, you're most likely going to work with a variety of people. So these are a great start for anyone. Why? Can somebody tell me, besides the career management, because this is really up to you to know who you are and what you're bringing to the table, but what do these all have in common, and what industry do you feel like these fit best?
Students, probably.
Students, but for these competencies, the problem solving, collaboration, if you were applying for a job in a certain industry, whether it's literature or construction, or where do you feel like these companies fit, these competencies, these skills fit best?
Probably business oriented.
Okay, why?
Because you have to communicate with other people.
Do you only have to communicate with other people in business?
No.
Where else do you need to communicate with other people?
In everything.
In everything, right?
Society, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, in everything. So what we call these transferable. These are skills that are transferable to any job that you do, right? So this is a great start to make sure, okay, if you have done problem solving, then with what task were you successful in implementing because of your problem solving skills, right? So this is how we help build up those skill statements. Now, we do offer other attributes. Sorry, this is really zoomed in here. These are other attributes. Some of these are repeating, right? But these are other attributes. Some on here is like taking initiative, flexibility, organization skills. So these are additional ones that you can brainstorm with, just to remind yourself of how awesome you are, but now show that on your resume. Okay, so this is how we do it through our skill statements. The other thing that we can do with the skill statements, here's like a basic statement, right, to an advanced statement. What makes a skill statement advanced is when we can start talking about results. Did you do public speaking for 10 people? Did you do it for 10,000 people? Right? Anywhere where we can paint a better picture for the reader, right? Were you responsible for managing payroll for 10 people? Were you responsible for managing payroll for 50 people? I want to say 10,000 people, but I don't know if that's realistic. Maybe it is. So anytime, we can't do that for every single bullet point, but when we have an opportunity to do that, we want to show those results of, it shows the extent of your responsibility. This doesn't just have to be in a paid experience, right? A lot of times, you may have like a personal project, right? I have students who will do video editing for various people, right? It's essentially a self-employment, right? And we can include that on your resume, or maybe you do projects, or you have a blog that you do and you don't get paid for it, but it's something that you actively do and you could showcase. We can list that as an example on your resume, and we can really emphasize those skill sets that you're bringing to the table. You don't have to start all of these from scratch. I'm showing you from scratch so that you can build them up. So I'm going to scroll down. I'll just go to this first one right here. Here's an example. Here's a baker in the cookie shop, right? I don't want you to look at the titles when you're looking through these resume samples, but just look at the bullet points, because here's where she utilized, here's the skill. So this is that power verb, the skill, specific attention to detail. Could have just put while baking cookies, and that would have been a basic statement, right? That would have been okay. But while baking and fulfilling large customer orders, this was that kind of result that shows us, paints a better picture of, she could have been even more specific of maybe how many orders or how large those orders were. But maybe you provide, and this is present tense because currently doing it. So use present tense with present situations, use past tense with past experiences. Maybe you provide excellent communication service, but maybe you want to include it with a different task, right? So you can look through some of these effectively communicated. Here's one of just talking about traveling, right? We talked about global and intercultural fluency. So you might get you'll get some ideas, or you might be able to brainstorm a few things where you want to translate that over to your resume and be inspired by it. That inspiration, that's what I'm looking for, right? Be inspired by what's going on here. Okay, so I'm anticipating that this resource, page 4, is something that I use all the time with students. And then the skill statements is what you're probably going to go back and look at as you're building up your resume. Questions on the skill statements? Okay. Now we talk about transferable skills, right? And one of those is digital technology. Now, let's say if you utilized Excel to execute the task successfully, that program is the skill, because then you're showing that you can demonstrate that digital technology in that task. So naming the actual program or platform that you're using is the skill. Okay. So let's go to just some general tips. So on the right side here, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the content that goes on there. So just a few things to keep in mind. Employers, I've even heard 6 seconds. I guess it depends on how many resumes they have on their, they have to go through, but they'll take anywhere from 6 to 30 seconds to look at your resume. And you're probably going to spend a lot more time on that building it, right? So because they're not spending a lot of time on that to kind of get a yes, no pile to then further dive into your resume, we really want to make sure that we're taking that effort to building it up. Also remember, if we're going to start being creative with our resume, remember that we read from left to right. Right? So don't put all your really important, relevant information towards the right-hand side of your resume at the very bottom, because we don't want that to be the last thing that they're seeing. So keep that in mind. I talked a little bit about right justifying your dates. Part of this is finding balance. When when we have a resume and you just have your content, right? If we didn't put anything towards the right, we just have this really awkward white space, right? Or if you get to a point where you're only 3/4 of the page down and you have this giant white space at the bottom, it's awkward. We don't want that white space. And so we try to find balance by moving some content to the right. Maybe we're increasing the size of our name a little bit more so that maybe we're increasing the spaces in between. This is where that design comes into place. You really have to make sure that you're finding that balance. You can also use columns, and I'll show you an example of what I mean by that. Because yes, you can have a 2-column resume as long as it's a 1-page resume. When you start going into 2-page, the column thing doesn't quite work. But we can also use columns in certain sections of a resume. So I'll show you an example of that later. Your margins, if you were to do this in Word, which that's what I'm comfortable in, but if you feel really comfortable in another platform to be creative with your resume, feel free to do that. We recommend Microsoft Word or Google Docs if you're starting from scratch. And by default, I think it puts you at 1-inch margins. You can go as narrow as 1/2 inch, so 0.5-inch margins all the way around. We don't want to go any smaller than that. Otherwise, it feels like your words are flying off the page and it's not attractive for the reader. And then the body of your font, I prefer that it's not any less than 11 font. Depending on what font you use, sometimes students can get away using a 10 font. We just don't want it to be straining to the reader, right? And then keep in mind, we want to have reverse chronological order within each category. What do I mean by that? Reverse chronological order. What does that mean?
Does that mean reverse chronological order? That means like you're doing it backwards, pretty much.
Yeah.
Like chronological, like when this date took place or what happened on this day, or well, you get what I'm saying. So like at the end of it, you would just be telling it in the backwards.
Exactly. Whatever your most recent experience has been, or your most recent project has been, if that's a category, that's going to be at the top. And then you're going to go backwards, right? Yeah. And then before you send it in, you'll want to save your resume as a PDF, because if you, for example, have done it in Word and you send it off to an employer and they have a different version of Word, it could get all, has anybody experienced that? I know I have, and they're like, whoa, what's going on here? So we don't want that to happen. And when you save it into a PDF, it doesn't mess up your format when you send it off. Okay, and you can still keep hyperlinks in there. So we'll talk about hyperlinks later of where you can use those. So now I want to ask you guys, and feel free to use the chat or unmute yourself. What do we even have on our resume? What is the content that we include? Your name, yeah.
Previous work. Sorry.
Go ahead, James.
Previous work experience.
Previous work experience, yeah. Brianna, you had another thing that you wanted to add?
I said skills.
Skills.
Maybe hobbies.
Maybe hobbies. What else could we have on our resume? What's that, Nick?
Education.
Education, yes. You are all going to have your education on there, right?
Contact information.
And contact information. Yeah, we want the employer to be able to get a hold of you. That's like in I think back to junior high, but where your teacher says, put your name at the top right corner of your paper so I know who you are, right? We're all going to have our name and our contact information on our resume. Absolutely. Anything else you want to add, James?
References.
References. I'm really glad that you brought that up, because I'm not sure that I had that on here. References used to be on your resume. And now references are actually a separate document that you can include with your resume.
Okay.
Yeah. So before, we used to list all our references on our resume, and then it moved to a little, references upon request at the bottom of your resume. Now we just have a separate document, and I'll show you where that's at in the handbook. We have an example of what that looks like. So I'm really glad that you said that. Thank you, James.
You're welcome.
So there's a lot of different content that we can have on our resume, and it depends on what you're bringing, right? So this is going to look different for everyone, but you got your first, last name, you have your contact information. The obvious contact information is your phone number, your email, right? You can put your location. It is not a requirement, in the sense that you don't have to put your address. You could put Chico, California, or wherever you're located. I let students know that, because on a resume, we don't put if we're married, we don't put what race we are, we don't put our age. And so your address could put you at a social economic standing, right? So, and depending on like what part of town that you live in, or if it has an apartment number versus a house number, you know, if we just want to put a location, Chico, California, then you can kind of leave that out if you want to, because that's going to come through an application later anyways. The other information that you can have in your contact information is a LinkedIn URL. If you guys are on LinkedIn, we really encourage students to participate in LinkedIn. Later in this workshop series, I'll be talking about LinkedIn and how we can network on LinkedIn. And also any online platforms that you have. So if you have a website, if you have an art portfolio link that connects and showcases all your art, if you write a blog, like maybe you have a link to your blog, that's additional information we can have in there. Your education, you can include your GPA if it's above a 3.0. Don't put it on there if it's below, okay? But it is optional for some industries, and like civil engineering, right? Those are pretty important to showcase, but not all industries. It's not necessarily for all of them. I put question marks on this one, right? Experience. We definitely want our experience on there, but we can also title it whatever we want. It could be literature experience, right? Or civil engineering experience, or internship experience, or volunteer experience. So but we don't have to separate volunteer from paid work. If we have relevant experience, and part of it's volunteer, and part of it's in an internship, and part of it's through a job, like part-time job or something, we really want to get those towards the top if that's what's relevant to what you're using your resume for. And so we can categorize that experience and title it to best fit that most relevant information up top, okay? Some individuals have room for interests and hobbies, and that it's really nice to do that, because you might automatically make a connection with the person that's interviewing you. Like maybe they like backpacking too, or maybe they're also an avid reader, right? So that can be a really nice opportunity. You can also have a project section. A lot of different majors have a lot of projects in their major, or research. And it can be in your personal, it doesn't have to be academic. You could have your own personal projects. So this is a section that you could have publications or presentations, things I don't have in your honors and awards, accomplishments. Some students, one student we have an example in our handbook is athletic excellence. They were applying for a coaching position, and that they wanted that right up to the top, right? So we can be creative with that. I want you to remember that. The skills. So Brianna, you were talking about skills. Now we were just talking about transferable skills. And I showed you where you need to use and implement the transferable skills in the skill statements. In a skills section is not where we list all of our transferable skills. As an employer, if I'm looking at your skill section and you say communication skills, teamwork, work ethic, right? We're just listing those. I'm just kind of taking your word for it. How do I know that you have communication skills or that you have teamwork skills? Where have you demonstrated that? And that's where those transferable skills brings most value, when we can highlight that clearly in a skill statement, okay? And I put etc. because it's just unlimited. Depends on what you're bringing. And you can meet one-on-one with a career advisor and specifically go over your resume and find out, well, how is this all going to best fit for you and how you're using it. So remember that you can have a one-on-one too. Okay. So I don't know that, how many of you would have an online portfolio or website or something to showcase?
It's not super applicable for what I've been doing
Yeah.
for the past few years. So
Okay. James, what about you? Do you have a place online where you've got literature of some kind?
I guess little reviews I post online, I guess, of games. That's about it, really.
Okay. And Brianna, what about you? Do you have any online
No.
platforms? Okay. So because it's not, that wouldn't be as common, right, in the civil engineering German major. It's a lot more typical in like a art or literature. So James, I'd really encourage that. When are you graduating, James? How many years left do you have of school?
By the end of 2022 is when I'll graduate.
Awesome. So you have a little bit of time that I would plant this little seed for you to think about, is there an online platform where you can professionally showcase your like reviews that you write, right? To showcase that written communication that you have, because this is something that you can include on your resume. So we can either include it, we were talking about in your contact information. You could put a website or a hyperlink. You can also include it if your content is connected to a company in some way, you can actually hyperlink the company's name and connect it to the website of where your content is. Or you can include it in the skill statement, right? Edit 20 plus music videos a month, maybe include what you're doing it with, right? With Final Cut Pro to meet the needs of artists nationwide, right? We included kind of the extent of who you're meeting with. So there are a couple of different places that you can showcase that.
Okay.
As far as what platform you want to use, that's a great question for your faculty. I would just touch base if you have an online platform and you're wanting to know how to best showcase it. They're going to know a variety of resources of where other students may have done that or what's being currently used right now. So I would ask and reach out to your faculty if that's something that you're wanting to do.
All
Okay.
right.
The next thing that we have here, okay, just simple design techniques. And I'm giving you general when we start talking about design. So we want the content. You need to get your title, the company, the organization, the dates, your skill statements, right? Just put it in plain text just get the content on the page. Then go back through and change that font, bold your titles or underline right? And then we go through and bold it. Now, depending on the industry, right, if you're a business, you can be creative and in a lot of like if you're using a lot of tables and charts and those kind of things in your major, then maybe that's how you showcase your skill sets. Maybe you give it a rating in a bar chart or something like that. This is where we could be kind of creative. These are just some general ideas. Sometimes you can create like this monogram. So these are examples down here, right? We all recognize who these companies are just by looking at their monogram. So you could design your own monogram. And I've seen that from students where they'll use their initials and be creative with it and even have it as like a watermark in the background. So it's not taking up extra space. Just as simple as using shapes and arrows. And I'll show you an example. I think I included it still in here, but just a template that I found where generally how you could use some shapes to give you an idea of what that looks like. Depending on who you've worked for, if you have some companies that are well known, you could use their logos, right? You could have their logos next to your experiences if that's something that applies to you. Using color. So we talked a little bit how you can use the color. You're not going to use that bright red color, but you can use color. You want to be limited with how much color you're using, and you don't want to use like a giant rainbow of color down. Like maybe just stick with one color or change the hue of the color, right? Because we don't want to be too distracting to the reader. Some people use that 2-column layout. So they might have like a color bar on the left-hand side where they include contact information and education, and then they include all their work or all their experience and projects and stuff on the right-hand side. So that's another option. And I've even seen like just bordering your resume, right? I'm going to show you an example. This resume is in our handbook, right? And our handbook is in black and white. So I wanted to show you the original. All the name and everything has been changed so to protect the student, but this is a real student's resume. They went with it, they designed it, and then we just helped to make sure that their skill statements were good to go. We want to try to keep them all to a single line, so we help condense some of these. But notice how this is all in one column, right? They're moving the dates and GPA over to the right-hand side, so that natural separation. But then in their experience, they actually have 2 columns that they're using, right? They're separating it, right? And then, oops, when we scroll down here, they have, instead of a skills section, they've titled it proficiency, right? We can be creative with what we call these things. And they've used 2 columns within that. And so that they've got 2 columns and then 2 columns within that. Know that you can be really flexible with where you're putting your content. What's important is that they used all caps for all their categories. I can clearly see the categories. They used a little bit of color. That even helped it more. They've used some bold, they've used italics, they've pushed the dates out to the right-hand side. They have clear bullet points. And the interests, they switched it up and they actually used icons. Right? And I like that they actually put what those icons mean underneath. Sometimes people just put icons on there and it's like of a human head with a question mark in the middle of it. And I'm like, I don't know what that represents, right? So sometimes we have to clarify what we're trying to be creative with. But then they're also using that a color bar. Here, they're using it on their name, right? So these are just some general things that we can do to start bringing in some of that little bit of style that we want to add, right? Now, here are just some templates that I found in the sense that I wanted to show, here's like a 2-column one. Here's another way that you can use icons, right, to bring in here. This would be appropriate in any industry to use these little icons. This person or this template, right, has used little squares to highlight their categories, so I can clearly see where the categories are. We don't recommend that students use templates. Why would we not want you to use a template?
Plenty of other students use templates.
Yeah, exactly. I had 3 students in a row one day, pre-COVID, when we're back on campus, 3 students in a row all came in with the exact same template resume. And no joke, I was like, by the 3rd person, I was like, listen, first of all, you got to change your template. Like, we don't want you to be conformed to the template. We want you to be inspired and pull different things from different resumes so that you make it your own, right? But you don't want to be lost. You don't want your name to get lost in this design, okay? So these are templates, but I'm pulling them up just to show you how, like this template, for example, they're using squares, right, to separate some of this. So they're using those shapes and they're using columns here to separate it. And here is where they're using like a bar. I know it's really fuzzy. You can't see the content here, but you're using a bar type system to show the level of proficiency that you are in each of the skills. So this is just another example of how you can use shapes and columns and be able to separate and use a little bit of color, right? They have a different background color. These are 2 examples. I pulled them from the internet. I do not recommend this style of resume, right? It's all over the place. The font, we didn't really talk about font, but this type of handwritten type font is like a big no-no on a resume. This resume, like, it's super clean, got nice lines, but like, I don't read like this, right? Like, please don't make me do that to get your content and your information. feel free to be creative with maybe how things are placed on your resume, but remember that we read from left to right, and like my head is like this, not doing this, reading your resume. Okay. Pictures. It's kind of, we don't advise it in the Career Center. It's not the most common practice in the US to include your photo. In other countries, you absolutely include your photo. And in some countries, you actually even include your marital status and your age on your resume. That's not what we do in the US. So if you choose to use a photo, like, then do so. I'm not going to tell you it's an absolute no, because some employers may really find that attractive to have a picture attached to a resume, but it's not standard practice. So this was another example. There's a lot of color here. There's a lot of, I don't even know where to start, right? When you build up your resume, my coworker actually said it looks like a birthday party invitation, right? This is more, I thought I had it. This is kind of just very nice and crisp and clean for industries. I would say more like the business, civil engineering type of approach. It depends on the job, right, that you're applying to, and if it's like a marketing PR and in their skill state or in their desires of the candidate, it's really important that you know how to use, I don't know, a certain platform, and you know that platform, and you choose to build your resume in that platform to really showcase that. Like, you can be creative with that, right? I've had a marketing student where they designed their resume differently for each company that they're applying to showcase, like, this is how I would market your company, right? But here's my information. So they pulled in some different like imagery and really customize it and that's a lot of effort, but it really stood his resume out from others. So does anybody have any questions with what I've shared today? I know that was a lot of information, but I'm curious if anybody has any questions.
I have a question.
Awesome.
I've heard a lot of things about objective or like prologues or like a statement, and a lot of mixed things about them. So I guess I'm curious what your opinion on like having a statement would be.
Sure. It is something that you can have on your resume, and I think that there's a time and a place for it. If you are going to, and I know like for example, our career fairs, right? If you're going to career fair and you're meeting with multiple people and you're specifically looking for an internship in the Sacramento area, and that is where you want to be, then having that objective of, seeking a summer 2021 internship in the Sacramento area, right? And maybe you include that industry that you're looking for. An objective can be really helpful with that because you're providing your resume to multiple employers. If you are, for example, because we use resumes for grad school too, right? Some of you had mentioned grad school. If we're using our resume and we're applying to an MBA program, for example, if our objective says, a current student wanting to, emphasize or build more skill sets through an MBA program, because some objectives are just like these little one-liners. I'm like, it's pretty obvious that that's what you want to do because you're putting your application in for it, right? We've been told by employers in the Career Center that when they see an objective, they'll typically skip over it because they tend to be so general and they don't provide a lot of extra detail. I've also seen in like professional summaries, because that's what they can be called, to professional summaries or objectives, listing out those transferable skills, right? I'm an excellent communicator. I work well in teams. And again, like, I want to see that in your skill statement. Where have you demonstrated those skills? So if you find that the content that you're including in your objective or in your summary is being repeated, or you have an opportunity to be more specific about where it's being used, then I feel like that space can be better used by making sure that you're including your projects and your skill statements or in your experiences and your interests and right, all of those. So I would say it depends. It depends on what you're using your resume for. And if it's just very obvious, I would suggest give yourself some more space to showcase what you're bringing to the table. That would be my opinion.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, great question. Any other questions? And then talking about the structure of your resume, right? Typically we put our name at the top and our contact information. I've seen even student resumes where they've had their name on the left margin, right? And they've had like a nice little clean line, and then they've been able to include all their content. So then they're using that whole space, and we're able to include their projects, which were really important on their resume, by adjusting and having their name on the left-hand side. And it was just very nicely done. So I've been very general with how you can be creative with your resume, because I don't want to really show you what creativity looks like, right? Because we all have a different idea of what that looks like. What I would encourage you to do is, if you want to add some creativity to your resume and or not, you have somebody look at it, come to the Career Center, make an appointment with your advisor so we can give a second pair of eyes and give you some feedback about what's working or not working. Because we've looked at many resumes, even in my previous experience, like I was hiring people and I was looking through resumes. So we have that insight and that experience to kind of let you know what's attractive for employees. And we're talking to employers. We're hearing from them of what they want. So hopefully we can give you that extra insight. Any other questions? I'm going to stop sharing here so that I know my face is not super small. I appreciate you guys coming today. And you guys had some great questions. I appreciate you, your input that you have today. So again, my name is Bettina Wildhaber. I'm in the Career Center. So, and then you can also go to the Career Center's page and find who your career advisor is. So we do have specific, Art is with the civil engineering, those kind of things. So, but feel free to reach out if you have any questions.
Thanks for having us. It was great.
You're welcome. You're
Yeah,
welcome.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much. Have a
Yeah.
great night.
Anytime, you guys too.